Okay. Dan, how's our volume?
Um, Try one more time.
How's our volume now?
Acceptable.
Testing out there. Good.
Well, he's not giving away much today.
Okay, it's doing this thing where it doesn't pick up whoever's sitting here, which is really annoying. Play with the gallery a little bit. I really want you to be the speaker, Dan. I don't know why. Try
It's a
this.
little echoey. Can you say that again?
It really wants you to be a speaker, and I don't know why.
Hmm.
All right, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump in. Maybe it'll pick me up at some point, or maybe I'll have to move again. There I am. All right, so this is my penultimate meeting of the Columbia County Housing Task Force as the Housing Development Coordinator proper. I guess I'll start with, I was hoping there'd be more of us here, but I think everybody's pretty well apprised of what's going to be happening for the next few months. But I'll just review it anyway. So tomorrow is my last day at CEDC and kind of on behalf of the county as well. Starting Monday, I will be working for Path for Progress as a senior research planner slash program manager of the Hudson Valley Alliance for Housing and Conservation. One of my first orders of business is to make that easier to say and easier to remember.
That's quite a mouthful, though.
Yeah, I know, right? However, CEDC is contracting with Pattern to continue to provide many of the housing services that I've been performing for the past 3 years. So the scope of work is still, I think, being hammered out. We've got it pretty much nailed into shape. The land bank will come with me for 3 months, so I'll continue to administer that. Mike Tucker, who's on the call, will continue to be the administrative director of the land bank. The board is unchanged. So that shouldn't really be much of an interruption of service, or it shouldn't be an interruption of service at all. Running the housing task force will come with me for those 3 months as well. We'll kind of talk about what the housing task force might look like going forward. And then I guess two bigger items are the workforce survey, which we will hopefully finally get out sometime in the next 2 to 3 months. And then the Pro Housing Communities Technical Assistance Grant, which is broadly the abandoned building inventory, as well as strategies to address abandoned buildings. I'll run that from wherever I am at Pattern as well. I'll be working, it'll be about 30 hours a month that I'll be working on CEDC slash Columbia County housing activities. Then the rest will be the assorted Pattern and Hudson Valley Alliance work. So the broad question, and the policy committee talked about this a little bit last week, and I think we'll continue to talk about it in the other two committees, one of which may be changing. The big question right off the bat was, does the housing task force continue? You know, this was initially advertised, or it was projected to be a three-year strategy or three-year initiative. I think there's been enough success that the supervisors, the chairs, and the board of supervisors, writ large, think it makes sense to continue the housing task force. My position will be filled at some point. Mike, do you want to talk about the timeline of that? I don't want to speak.
Yeah, I don't. I've never heard of the idea of not continuing the task force. So I'm glad that everybody's in agreement with that. And Chris, before I start, I just want to thank you. You've done a phenomenal job over the 3+ years that you've been with us. I think if we go back to the initial discussions between CEDC and the Board of Supervisors and the housing forum that we did with Duncan Barrett and various speakers, and then look at the work that you have done in terms of getting grants, particularly the ADU grant and the vacant or abandoned housing grant, as well as all of the work that's been done with the creation and activity in the land bank. We really are very, very grateful to you, and are very appreciative of the fact that we were able to work with Patterns to be able to engage you on a consulting basis. What Chris and I have done is worked on a lot of information and data sharing, but also on a job description for him. And the situation with my job is that we went out for a new round of resumes for my job yesterday, and we have one application already, so that's good. But my theory was that to replace Chris before the person who is going to replace me arrives would be an issue potentially for that person, that I picked the wrong person, and they need to pick someone that they can work with. And so what Chris and I did on the job description, our board is looking to cut off the resume gathering for my job on May 1st. My thought is, and they hope to have someone committed by June 1st. The theory would be that they would need to give some notice to wherever they were coming from, so they'd be starting July 1st. My thought was about May 15th to put Chris's job description out for 30 days, so that shortly after that person commits to coming, even if they're not here, they can start reviewing those resumes and even perhaps hire someone so that they come at the same time that the new CEDC president comes. So we're absolutely committed to continuing this. I think that if anything, the need has become even greater, and we've made progress towards at least beginning to address some of the issues on the fringe. And if we're going to get into the center of it, we want to be fully committed, and our board is committed to that as well. So again, I think we all appreciate the work you've done, Chris, and we are glad that you're going to a job with a partner of ours. Pattern started all of this work for us with their study, and that even when we have a full-time replacement for you, I foresee a ongoing relationship with you through Patterns, and it'll help keep the continuity that everyone has worked so hard, from the supervisors to the task force to the various committees, working with you to achieve. So again, thank you, Chris. Any questions before you get to your agenda?
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
All right, so what we started talking about in the policy committee, and like I said, we'll continue this conversation. This will be the first half of it, and then at the June meeting, hopefully the committee meetings between now and then, we'll have a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like when I hand the housing task force off to whoever takes my position. So we took a real hard look at the things that have been working well, and the things that maybe haven't been working so well. And Dan Barafaldi, I think, really in your remarks, you hit on two of the things that seem to be the most common answers. There are at least three people on the policy committee that said that one of the most valuable things the Housing Task Force has produced or enabled is better understanding of state programs that are out there, but also the nature of that housing challenges that not just our county is facing, but the region and the state. What we have not done as well as we could have done is make that information really easy to digest and really readily available. So that's one of the things that I would like to get done before the next person comes on, so that it's just basically something that they can inherit, and it's just you press a button, a newsletter goes out. You direct people to the website, and they can, here's your housing toolbox, here's these state programs, here's what they are. So that'll be a lot of the work that I'll be doing as far as the hours at Pattern that are devoted to the Housing Task Force work. We'll be setting up both the Housing Task Force presence on the website, but making it easier for folks who can't come to the meetings, or who just aren't aware of the variety of programs that are out there. Really putting that together in a way that's easier for people to access and easier for them to understand. The other thing that I think the Housing Task Force has done well is been an incubator for a variety of strategies. We started talking about forming a land bank in this room. A few months later, it became a reality. We talked about various grants that we applied for and won in this room. The pro-housing community success started here. So I think that will continue to be probably the strongest piece of the Housing Task Force, is working through recommendations to make to the Columbia County Board of Supervisors. should they be ultimately the group that has to make the decision on something, which it very often is on the grants. One thing I wanted to, I guess, get some feedback on from, I guess I'll have to make do with the task force members who are present. And then we'll get input through email through the rest of the couple of months. So we've got 3 committees now. They're policy, outreach, and pre-development. I think outreach works really well, or at least the concept of outreach is really solid. Policy and pre-development, I'm a little bit less sold on, and we keep getting into this. And the supervisors and Michelle can attest to this because they're broadly the only members of the housing task force that are in all of the committee meetings. We very often talk about the same topic in each meeting, and sometimes from the same perspective. I guess just because the topics are large, and often one committee meeting isn't enough time to really talk through everything. And policy is something that I'm not sure the housing task force is well positioned to get involved in. You know, we can talk about certain zoning policies. We can talk about, various legislation that's being proposed at the state, but I think there might be a better use of that time. So one of the things that we talked about in the last policy committee meeting, oddly enough, is maybe changing that to a project committee so that we can speak kind of largely about individual projects. So for example, this abandoned building study would be such a project, and then it can either filter out or filter up to the main housing task force, or it can filter to the other community or the other committees, but that's where it would start. So I'm open to feedback on switching that committee out, or we could keep it and switch pre-development out, because I'm not sure if that committee makes sense to continue going forward either. I'm open to the conversation. Or it can just rule by feedback.
I think pre-development is one of those committees that could be better used. I think most towns are ill-equipped to be ready for housing development. And that's an area where we've identified work that needs to be done, but I don't know that we've necessarily done the work that needs to be done. I think there could be more training and more communications around how to identify and be ready for housing projects. So
I go back to what Chris spoke in the beginning of just trying to communicate our mission with
right.
local municipalities that,
But that is, I would agree with that if that includes how to be ready for a developer.
Right.
Right.
If I can speak as a non-committee member, I agree with that, and we learned a lot just in our application for that TAG funding from a municipal perspective about everything we needed. As far as checking off a list of pre-development of a site, and you were obviously integral in helping with that in that application. So I think it is a good edification measure. But how many places will you be able to flourish in that process?
Well, and that was one of the things that we talked about as well. Do we want to have more sub-regional coalitions like the Rojan Housing Task Force or Housing Committee, comprised of 3 to 4 towns and or villages that all work together on housing issues instead of everybody being a little bit siloed. I remember when I talked to Angus about the pro housing community certification, he was getting frustrated with the forms and he asked me, is anybody else working on this? Like, yeah, we're all working on it, but he had no idea that other towns are working on it. So I think there could be outreach kind of diffused between the towns as well as from the task force to the towns.
And I think there's some leverage in that because we know we're aware of 2 not-for-profit housing developers that serve our community, both of which their capacity ebbs and flows, and it mainly ebbs or right now. So I think to have 4 towns reaching out to the same 2 people, wouldn't it be nice to have some prioritization of projects? Who's more ready? And the other piece I would add to that is the financial stacks are getting increasingly complicated. So to have a navigator to help people understand not only what funds are available, but which ones might be combined and how best to get where you need to go for the overall funding for the project, I think. But again, those all revolve around not only information, but communication of information.
I wonder if I could jump.
Itself often rewards multiple intergovernmental partners.
Yes.
Go ahead, Dan.
So one of the takeaways from the policy meeting that I had was not so much that we create a single committee for projects, but that we contemplate the committees more on a project basis. So my thinking on that is it solves a couple of the nagging problems we've thought about over the past few years. One of which is it feels very much like we come together once a month, we have an exchange of ideas, and then we all kind of stare at Chris and say, "Get it done over the next month." And I think it's possible that if we said, "Okay, we're going to focus on 4 basic projects this year or for the next 6 months," and I'll just use past projects because that's easier. But the Project One ADU, the pro housing community, those are the kinds of projects that we as a committee have looked at. If we built a small committee around each one of those projects, so an ADU committee, um, a pro housing committee, and we put 4 people on that committee, and we say, okay, this is yours now. You run with this. And so I think that it solves the we all go home and don't do our homework kind of problem, in that we have to meet as a separate committee and kind of actually do the advance work. I think it gets more subject matter expertise to all of our members, or certainly that committee of members. So when I think about it, I don't think so much about doing away with policy as I do, really just creating this process by which we commit. We bring together a small group of people. We give them a little bit of direction. We wind them up and we let them go. And I think that was my takeaway from our project-based committee discussion during the policy meeting. And I want to also say that Chris is being very modest about one of the major accomplishments of the committee over the last 3 years. And I found this out when Ghent decided to create an affordable housing committee at the town level. And because I've served in this task force, I was tasked with chairing that, and that's a wonderful honor. But frankly, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have the slightest idea where to start with that. And I mean, really no idea. And not only not have the knowledge, but I wouldn't even know who to pick up the phone and speak to. And one of the great things that happened with this committee is we all came together. We took Chris's brain dump on us every month, and we went out back to our respective silos, and we tried to do as much knowledge transfer as we could during board meetings and comp plan meetings and all that kind of thing. So there's been this combination of knowledge transfer and evangelism that has happened with this group that I think is very, very important, can't be kind of undervalued. So when whoever is making the decision about whether to continue this group, I think that's a very important consideration. I'm planning to pick up the phone and call Chris. If I can't get Chris, I'm going to call Meredith or Brenda or Keith or Tim or Ron. I'm going to say, I got a problem with housing, and I know all of them will pick up the phone and will help me apply their brains to it. So I wanted to make those 2 points.
This is very helpful in terms of our search for a person to fill the position too. So, to give them a idea of what is expected, not, Chris was able to come in and guide us through a process that we didn't have a clear idea as to how it would evolve. But now that you're at a point here, the kind of activities and resources that you're specifically looking for should be things that we incorporate into that job description.
Can you do the work of 12 people?
Depends on who those 12 people are.
I wanted to kind of build off Dan's point. I think like one of the committee meetings are most effective is when we had a very specific thing to tackle.
Yeah.
So I think about like whether it was a specific grant or something, like what are our priorities for the ADU scoring application, right? Or when it's times when like a lot of municipalities are facing the same question, like how do we design our short-term rental laws? And so I think like having a project grant committee makes sense. I also wonder if there's a way, I think it should be standing just because it's like a lot of organizational work to start something and get people in. But maybe there's a way to also invite in more people on an ad hoc basis. But I also think if there's kind of like a project grant committee, I also think whether it's outreach or whether it's another one, maybe it meets bi-monthly or something where, yeah, it is more about getting someone from each municipal housing task committee or regional housing, and by regional, I mean, tri-town or something, into, because it does make a bit of a gap sometimes where you have to individually go to like, the road jam group or something, or maybe you don't get to go to the Chatham Housing Committee and so I think having something that's a little bit more organized, and kind of also a lot of just like, they might be the ones to bring up what the common issue is that then should go to the policy committee. And I think zoning is one thing that we haven't, that comp plans and zoning is something that I think every town does have to tackle, and that's one we haven't gotten to as much. We've had like great presentations here, but that's just something that I think is a useful thing. I think what's not as productive, which is that you just having to repeat information to everybody rather than like using it as an update forum rather than as a let's tackle a very specific issue.
Yeah, I think the zoning, we've kind of assiduously stayed away from really trying to influence individual town and village zoning. Being a sounding board is one thing, but looking at a town zoning and say, you should do this.
I don't think
Here's
there's
a
like
fine
a
line.
Providing resources.
Yeah, it's different.
here's
Yeah.
a question everyone's getting variance applications for
Yeah.
this ADU thing. How do we solve, like, do you have a good idea? No should.
But even more generally, it would be, what are the zoning, what zoning encourages the development of housing? And what, and in rural areas, what kind of zoning, in rural areas would encourage housing but preserve rural character? Because I think there's always that constant tension between, well, we don't want housing because we want open space, or we don't want, so, and I mean, someone said to me this morning, my jaw is still on the floor. We love the comp plan. We just don't want to change the zoning. Well, why have a comp plan if you don't want to change the zoning?
So you just update the dates in the comp plan, is that all this?
Well, they didn't understand cluster housing.
So I think what I'm hearing is, so, all right, there's one of two ways it can go, right? So right now, if I'm thinking about projects, the housing task force is either, I'll say about to tackle, really. There's the workforce survey, so that's its own project. There's this abandoned buildings, grant through Pro Housing, got its own project. And then we talked about this in policy committee, and this is 3 years to the day from when this was the most popular ask throughout the entire county. The housing toolbox, the planning and zoning toolbox. So I talked to Nan Stolzenberg, and she's completely fine with us doing something with that, as long as she sort of gets a heads up about what that is. And I think that's going to be its own project, sort of not retrofitting, but making that housing toolbox really for us instead of designing one from scratch. So that could either be, so I want to make sure that I'm understanding both Dan and Michelle correctly here. Are you suggesting that one committee works on each of those projects? Or all of those projects? So there's either 3 committees, right? Each one gets a project, or there's one committee that handles all projects and that's where they live.
I think we need to give each committee a project,
So each
do that
project-
anyway, otherwise it's overwhelming, But to get something really done.
What was the
Still
answer?
third.
3, he held up.
3.
So 3 different committees, each.
Oh, we're
with
still
one
on third.
Okay,
I mean,
So-
do we have
We're-
that much capacity?
yeah, the issue is, here's a full, and no shade to anybody, I understand, people have other obligations, but here's the monthly housing task force meeting, it's the second to last one where I'll be here, and there are 4 housing task force members here. So trying to create 3 committees that will come to the table and do the work that these projects require, that might be kind of a tough lift.
Well, Michelle also said something which I think is important, where we were most successful was when we had a project that, yes, well, I think, so I think that we would perhaps get a greater commitment if people not only had a specific project, but also had a responsibility to report back at a next meeting with a work assignment.
Yeah, I suppose there could be more continuity from committee meeting to committee meeting, and if you're hanging that on kind of the hook of a project, it's easier to build that workflow out.
And I think Dan said in his earlier comments, if we had identified 3 or 4 projects for the year, then the committee sits down and says, okay, our task is to complete this work in 6 months or 8 months or 9 months. How do we get there?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think it's 3 years in and we haven't reevaluated who's on the task force, who's showing up, who's doing the work. It might be time to do that. But if we can't put 12 people on 3 different committees who are going to actually do some work, we have the wrong 12 people. In my humble opinion, boldly stated.
Well, there's a lot of commitments for other people out there, but There's a lot going, I mean,
Yeah.
I know these guys, they're on committees all the time, I mean, at local levels, there's fewer and fewer people doing stuff actively that are knowledgeable. Right now in Austerlitz, we've got an upswell of people who don't really know how government works and things like that, but they're trying, I mean, and they're gonna learn.
Right.
They come up to the level. And what I notice is, and I was just thinking as we're sitting here, we have fewer people on the Zoom call even.
Yeah.
We used to get people from Housing Task Force. I know in Austerlitz, there was one lady that used to listen all the time and report back to the Housing Task Force in Austerlitz. Somehow we need to bring those people together so that if we do it, and this is my opinion, if we do a zoning box or whatever we're gonna do, toolbox, I don't think it should come from us, that this is what you need. We need to be able to present that to the people on these task forces and say, hey, here's an idea, take a look at it,
Right.
see what you can utilize.
Go back to.
But I just get worried that it comes across like we're trying to push something on for them.
But I would, because Michelle referenced the task force, now you're representing, I don't know how many towns in Columbia County have a housing task force. Is it 3? Is it 15 out of 19? I'd be surprised if it were more than 25%. So maybe that is something that we should think about. We have everybody certified as pro-housing, but is it, what has happened beyond that? Has that generated a housing task force in that community? Because I don't know how many housing task force we have.
I actually don't know that number off the top of my head, but I think we talked about that at the policy committee meeting, that
And
those
we did that.
municipalities that do have, whether it's a task force or committee,
Right.
whatever they call it. One person showing up to at least this meeting, just it's once every other month, it's pretty shallow commitment. But at least that way they'd be able to take back what we talk about in this room, they'd be able to take it back to their committees. And that would, I think, open up a much better relationship between the local committees and the county task force.
But I don't think those committees exist, and that was the other reason I agree with what Janal said earlier. Whether we look at this individually or regionally, I think there is an advantage to looking at it regionally for the reason that you described.
Yeah.
People are busy, it's harder to find volunteers, but I think we also have more capacity and more leverage if those committees are larger than individual towns.
Cause it's not just that they take back the information, but my gosh, if they gave us a couple questions to field.
Yeah.
Something that we research, and that's where the committees, the other committees would come in with, yeah, exactly.
All
I
right, so
feel
you
like
want to get back to this?
There's a halfway
Well,
step.
no, Even if I disagree, I disagree.
I'd like, Chris, if I could just quickly touch, and Brenda, maybe you can help share in this too, but I liken this a little bit to, the climate smart committees in the county. Most every town started a climate smart committee, the county started a climate smart committee. We found out originally in the climate smart task force that, there was a disconnection between the town climate smart committees and the county. And yet the county had now appointed, Don Meltz as a full-time director, basically, to do the work, similar to what Chris is doing. We restructured that group so that we had to have different members from the towns belong to that county task force so that there was representation. And that might be a direction that we consider going in the future, whether the town has a task
I
force or
like that
not.
idea.
That the task force is made up of different people from the towns. And as you know, Don just recently put out a real nice document from the county climate smart task force about this is the work that all the towns have done, and we do have more town involvement in climate smart committees, but that structure might be something to look at. So.
Yeah, my suggestion was going to be that a half step between where we are today and having every town with its own housing committee is to just ask the town board to assign somebody to attend this meeting, even as an observer, and bring that information back to the town board. I've been providing that function to my town, and it's pretty effective. I think if nothing else, when somebody on the town board has a question about housing, usually they know who to call. And when I don't know the answer, which is, whatever, 97% of the time, I know who to call. So I think it could be a great tool to just say, hey, every town supervisor, could you just pick somebody in the town? We've got a seniors person, we've got a climate smart person, we've got a parks person. let's do a housing person and just have them come, even listen on the Zoom call.
Membership, though, I think it's better to move to the membership of the committee. I know that's a bigger discussion.
Right.
I mean, it would be a board of supervisors discussion about changing the membership of the committee,
Of the housing task
of the housing
Right.
task force, but I think that it's hard to ask. I mean, first of all, I would hope that if the town board appointed someone, that it would be someone who had an active interest in housing and would participate. But you are more invested if you're actually a member of something rather than attending on the fringes of or the edges of something. And then I think that if there is a member from each town, then the obligation to inform that town, we're halfway toward meeting that obligation because we've given you a spot.
Right.
There's someone from your town is expected to attend and to take that information back. And right now, we don't have that direct line of communication.
It's just so.
Yeah.
I guess two points on this. Dan, to your point, one of the first, it was pretty early on. I think it was my first 6 months or so here, and I tried a couple different times. I asked each supervisor and mayor to name a person in their community who would be the point person for housing conversations or housing just topics. And I think I got maybe 5 replies.
I think that's very broad, though.
Out of the 3 or 4 times that I tried, so maybe it just needs to be packaged differently.
Yeah.
Or
Well, now
communicated
that they're
differently.
finding out you're the real deal. Did I say that right? No, I mean, it's like,
Oh, yeah, nobody knows.
I mean, it's like at first you come along, you say, well, we got, this is what we're gonna do, give me the name of stuff. But now, 3 years into it, you can say what examples of what you're hoping to convey. I think a perfect example of if somebody was attending a meeting was when you were talking about the 3/4 acre parcel. The small parcel one time. I don't know if your town adopted it or not.
Yeah.
But that's something that could have gotten kicked around, and in my mind, it should have got kicked around everybody. I sent the information to my town of Austerlitz task force, who I think they just, I don't know, that nothing happened. But I'm just saying, you try to get the information down, but it's still good that, every month, if you get people you can ask the questions to.
So there's gotta be a happy medium there somewhere, because if there's one representative from every community on the task force, now it's like 40 people on the task force.
Yeah, no, you get,
It's 20, it's 20,
Well, there's 23.
19
you
towns.
do the villages too.
Oh, we do the villages as well.
There's 23
Well,
communities altogether.
Yeah.
I don't think you do villages. It's almost impossible to get anything done at the county level in terms of
They're the
zoning.
ones that can educate us on the infrastructure,
So you get the
Definitely.
towns and you get the city of Hudson. You have to have.
which really, if we ever talked about a project, I'm sorry to derail it, so it would be like infrastructure system number 7. Like, how do you start that? What do you do? And obviously, like I jest to Brenda about East Chatham, but there's a lot of water sensitivity issues in East Chatham, and it's divided by our town lines. And it would be great to have a working model on A through Z, what a municipality or multiple municipalities can do to create this system and implement it in the long term.
Absolutely.
So,
Good grant money right now for a multi-county thing for something like that.
well, the problem is, it's the same problem everywhere is elected officials have terms, interest level wax and wane,
I understand.
money
Oh, that's a good example.
and
That's a good example.
Yeah.
But maybe it doesn't have to meet every month with this group, but like at least at a minimum, once a year or something like that, we invite them in or something, I agree with you, now you're up to the,
Just to go back to Ron's example of the climate smart task force, it meets once a month and we get a
Yeah.
large number of people each month. I mean, they're of the 19 or 20 members of the task force, which are now all town appointed. We get at least a dozen to this morning, I bet we had 15 on the call. So I think once they make that investment to be that person, they show up.
So maybe so right now we've got the housing task force proper, right? Which is folks from a variety of perspectives and fields throughout the county. And then there's the advisory board, which technically Michelle is a part of, and Lisa's on it as well. And that is, housing professionals, people that work full-time in housing or, something community development related.
Well, my way of, I feel that, in my realm of this, I've been very minimally able to contribute because of the way that my position is structured as a subordinate governmental organization. And I know I was asked to come by 2 supervisors, And it's been very helpful when I can come. This conflicts with the meeting I have in another county, that's why I can't come as often. But why I was selected to come and be engaged is that I have it's a huge impact to my organization, which has 40 to 45 employees because of housing. And that's why, because of my background, and I don't currently work in housing, but I had and worked with patterns and such. So for me, it's like, I'd like to be more able to support or be engaged, but I do think there needs to be a way and mechanism for the towns to connect with the resources and you'd share that you're going to think about that and how that would happen, but then there has to be something actionable they're gonna do. So like, people get excited about something and it ebbs and flows, but if they know they're going to be figuring out what's happening with all the zombie properties and the tax money, and can they sell off those properties and bring money back into their town, I think they'll get activated. But they have to have a tangible thing, and I think that's kind of hard because every town has its own zoning and every village and all those constraints, but I think the zombie property, are we calling that stuff? Or the
Just abandoned.
abandoned, okay, it's not chic anymore. So the abandoned properties, to me, is one that you could get a lot of energy around because it's impacting the tax base of each town, the valuation,
Everybody's got one that's an eyesore.
everybody has a couple usually.
Yeah.
And and it's also, if you do it in like a storytelling manner, like this occurred because there was and it's almost often, right? There was a challenge between family members and whoever owned it. It's still I know of one that's been going on for 45 years in one town. And it's because the siblings won't agree on it, and they then will pay the taxes off, and then it runs it back up. And I know everyone has those stories. So like, how do you deal with that? Because that's hundreds of thousands of dollars each town loses every year. And then that property, creates depreciation and such. So I
But
think,
that's gonna happen with our new study. I think we're gonna
Yeah.
identify those properties.
yeah, I think with an actionable item with it, like, so we don't identify them. And then what are we gonna do?
Take them back to the towns.
So I guess my question here is, do we want to think about creating, I guess it would be like almost a community advisory board, right? Where you've got members of, it would be the housing committees from towns, maybe villages.
Is this this is an alternative as opposed to changing membership?
Yeah, Mike,
I just think, I don't know how you're gonna manage another group of
yeah, starting to get on the.
25 people. I think where you're headed is the right place to head. And I think it could be another year or so till we get to the point where that can be managed. I think the land banks hopefully will generate funds that will allow us to hire additional staff to focus on housing. And I think that, what you were talking about earlier, the newsletter and a website that takes people to where they can get some self-help before they come to us, so that, as Michelle pointed out, every time you have a conversation with someone new, you graciously bring them up to the same level that people who have been involved for years achieve. But I do think it's all on the right track. And I think that, one area that I've been concerned about is if we did find identifiable sites and we did find interested developers, each of those developers are going to want to come to the IDA and they're going to want some type of benefit. So what Chris and I had started to work on was looking at what other IDAs in upstate New York have done, so that it's not a one-off every time they come in and then you have a mismatch of why did they get that and I only got this, or vice versa. And it would be dependent, if you were not going to give any benefit other than build apartments, you'd get 485B, which is the standard uniform pilot policy. If you were going to, or 10, and it'd be 10 years, 50% the first year to 0 the last year. If you're willing to put income restrictions on it, the more restricted it was, and the longer you were to agree to the restrictions, it would be a benefit chart that you would be eligible for. As an example, when Providence Hall and Schuyler Court was sold, the developer committed to 30 years, a new 30-year Section 8 contract. Well, the city IDA gave them a 7% shelter rent pilot. Now, you wouldn't give that to someone who was building market apartments and renting them at $2,500 a month. So I think putting some of those things in place as well, and Chris has a very extensive list of developers, And I think when you look at the state's Fast New York program for industrial and commercial property development, I think that, one area, and it's only one of 3 or 4, and I think you do need to pick 3 or 4, where you want to move to the next level and start seeing projects be built. And so in addition, it's very difficult to get some of the money from the state. And even with the $2 million for the ADU program, Chris, how many units did that ultimately benefit? 14?
14.
Yeah. So, I do think we're going to need, and the issue then becomes, there are some towns who are not interested in having multifamily housing. And that's okay. And we're limited by where they can go because of water, sewer, gas, electric, and broadband at the same location. But, I have a level of desire to see us move in a direction where we're going to get projects built. And, Chris has a couple of good projects that he's got underway. On March 15th, a developer from Saratoga gave us a IDA application for a project in Kinderhook at the Blue Spruce Motel. They're going to convert that into 52 units of market rate, but he has a reasonably rate. It's not going to be luxury, upscale, $3,000 a month units. And the IDA is going to accept his application that he filed on the 15th. On its meeting on Tuesday, they're going to authorize a public hearing. If the public hearing goes well and there's no negative feedback from the taxing jurisdictions, we'll get a letter next week. The IDA would consider approving that project with a 10-year 485B lookalike pilot on May 5th. That's incredible to get that done in 45 days. But because the site was there, it's got the capacity to convert the motel septic into what they need. It's not in the residential area, it's in the commercial strip. But, I think we have to also be ready, willing, and able to try to get some developers here, recognizing, as we've always said, if you can build 200 units in Saratoga or Dutchess County, the fixed cost or the soft cost being amortized over those units is a lot more cost effective than building 40 or 60 units in Columbia County. But, I do think we have to start to bring in developers and try to match them up with landowners or town officials who want to see development.
Thanks, Mike.
Are there 2 IDAs in Columbia County?
There's a city of Hudson IDA
There's 2.
and a county.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly.
Yeah. The first
right.
question I got is he going to take Section 8 vouchers? And we said, well, if he's eligible and the people are eligible, putting aside a court case and questions that you have to accept them.
But I thought you had to have a housing authority to do Section 8.
No, any landlord can take Section 8 vouchers.
No individuals, but in large groups.
No, it's one at a time, right? If you had a certificate, it wouldn't be a whole building of.
That's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. Oh, the difference between a building and individuals.
Yeah.
Anybody can take an individual, but if you want to do a building that's primarily, you have to have.
And if you look at what Hudson's trying to do with JL Edwards, and they didn't get the state grant they needed to get their financing stack, which, as you point out, Brenda, is getting more complex with each deal. And so the state wouldn't give them the low-income housing tax credits because they had a $5 million gap in their $40 million stack. And they're trying to get that redeveloped so they can apply next year. But there were only 2 projects awarded in each regional council district. And because Hudson had gotten $10 million for, what was it? Which project was it for, Chris, that Hudson got the $10 million? No, the $10 million for housing.
Was this from this round?
Yeah, just in the last round.
Mill Street.
Was it
Mill Street, yeah.
Carney project.
Yeah, so you're competing against yourself and you're competing against the region. So we need to get more self-help directly with developers who can put these deals together. But again, that's one little aspect of the things you're talking about doing, because if you don't have, you're still building infrastructure the way I see it, so that you can get to that point.
Mike, of the properties that Galvin donated to Bard, do you have an idea of how many of those in this were affordable housing?
They
Yeah,
have to get affordable housing, do we?
Chris and I have met
Can they
with
keep
Art
their
several
affordable housing
times.
units?
Some of the units were in good shape. They had been renovated and restored. Others were still had red X's on them. But we have that data somewhere.
Yeah, it's a mix. And they're tied to various regulatory agreements from different,
Right.
there's different periods of affordability and they started at different years.
Can some of them continue in affordable housing even though the donation occurred or no?
Yeah, and you know, Bard will not and cannot keep those properties for very long, right? It's outside of our commission as a, as an institute of higher learning. So at some point they'll go back out into the housing world. Yeah, but the plan is to displace nobody. I do want to come back to this committee thing because I want to get this hopefully settled before we leave in the next 10 minutes. So I'm hearing ad hoc committees for projects, right? Does that make sense? So we have a workforce survey committee, we have an abandoned buildings committee. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I thought that we were gonna give, well, maybe a committee is, way I'm funny.
Or like working group, maybe.
Work, you know,
We'll call it a working
so that
group.
within the committees, if you would, for assigning them a task.
All right, so we'll call these working groups.
But if you wanna change the name of a policy, or I don't care about that, but I mean, if.
Well,
If
I wanna
that
keep
committee,
it
if that
manageable.
committee is tasked with. Job,
Yeah, I just want to keep it manageable. So if there's going to be a working group for like the workforce survey, that's its own thing, and then one for abandoned properties, that's its own thing. And then the standing committees, I think it makes sense to keep outreach because it sounds like that's what we're leaning into even harder, right? Disseminating the knowledge that we have in this room to the towns and villages in the city. So outreach stays the same. Policy, I think that's a longer conversation. Pre-development, to run this point, I think makes sense, getting the towns or getting the communities ready for development. Or just having conversations about what does it look like to ease development or to incentivize it.
I kind of like the idea of changing policy to projects.
Policy to
If I could
projects.
go along with that, I don't know.
I don't know, does pre-development need to be regularly
I
voted?
don't think it does.
I don't think so.
But these groups already, well, I mean, you know, there's, the committee meetings are every other week and then we have this, so they're already only meeting once every 2 months.
Well, that's recent. This
That's
year.
that's as of.
What
I don't
if you
I
first?
think times a year, I think you need enough to glue, there needs to be enough time, enough meetings for people to come together to do. Some glue to the meetings, I mean, it's late.
Yeah, I think for the project, it's gonna be more of like, July through November, the ADU review committee is gonna be meeting regularly. And then also I think that's a chance for people who don't have the availability to just like sign on to all meetings forever. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, I can work on this committee for the next 4 months.
What if you were to ask each town to send a representative to these meetings so that you could identify the depth of interest, gauge people, and use it to get information back so that if they know that there's some structure to support them, they might be willing to form a housing committee if they don't have one. And the people that have a housing committee might not be aware that we have resources.
Can the supervisors in the room help with that?
We can put out the word, and again, I don't think you're asking them to be members of the task force right now, we're not looking to reach.
Just to attend the meeting.
Which may be in the future,
Just have them
but,
sign on to the Zoom.
right,
Yeah.
just trying to attend the meeting.
Just one, if there's 5 people like at a local level, one out of those 5, doesn't have to be a chairperson, doesn't have to be.
And some people may tell us what we're not doing right when we have them come to our meetings.
We do this all the time and
So maybe the third time will be a charm.
Yeah, I think you could take the mic out of that mic.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll hear that.
Would
All right, so-
pre-development and outreach be kind of the same? I don't know.
No, I think outreach it's really, I almost wanted to call it education, but I don't wanna call it that. So it's really, that's information sharing.
I agree, that's probably more like a 1980s type title.
Education, yeah.
We don't need no education.
Okay, so
And then if you see that it works, you can formalize it rather than formalizing
Right.
it and trying to fill it.
When we've done this in Ghent, we just send that person and call them a housing liaison or something to the Affordable Housing Task Force, something like that.
Sounds good.
and we can start to do, maybe we can produce high level summaries of the housing task force meetings, like just a one pager. Here's what happened in this 2 month period, and then just distribute that.
Yeah, I was limited to, yeah, I one time asked somebody for a report, a very deep report on something, and I said, keep it within the one paragraph. Well, we've got 3 pages.
I think that's probably that's a good practice for all of our project work groups and committees, that they should just, following a meeting, they should send a half pager or one pager back to the task force that says, this is what we're working on. These are the goals of the next 30 days. It's pretty common.
All right, I think this is a good chunk for me to work on over the weekend, to start to get this together. We got about 6 minutes left, so there's a couple of pieces of like broader housing news, that I'll just share in this room, and then you can take it back to your communities, or to your homes. One big one, so speaking of Section 8, last month, New York State Supreme Appellate Court, whichever the highest court, and I think that is the highest court in the New York Appellate, ruled that landlords don't have to accept Section 8 vouchers. So up until about a month ago, if somebody had a Section 8 voucher and you had an apartment for rent, you basically had to take the Section 8 voucher. That was declared unconstitutional, I think, under the Fourth Amendment, whichever one.
Fourth Amendment, unlawful.
Basically, if you were a landlord, and I'm sure Dan knows this, if you were a landlord and you accepted a Section 8 voucher, that also meant that you had to make that unit available for inspection at any time, which was declared unconstitutional. So Section 8 vouchers are no longer just something that landlords have to take in New York State. We're sure we'll get appealed again, but right now that's the reality.
Was there an organization behind the appeal?
Yeah, it happened out of Ithaca. There was a group that sued basically because when you take Section 8, you have to sign their lease addendum, and that means that it's no longer voluntary. It's supposed to be a voluntary participation, but if you require that there's no discrimination based on income source, and that source makes you sign away your right to prohibit inspection, then they have circumvented the Fourth Amendment for unlawful search and seizure. So that's how the it's pivoted.
That protection, having that protection go away, I mean, at least those units were periodically inspected and sometimes in better condition than they might have been otherwise because they had that protection. I'm sorry to see that protection go away.
Yeah, it was kind of a long time coming. I think that's a case and a decision that was 2 or 3 years in the making at least. There are local sort of options that towns, villages, cities can take. A lot of, and it always comes back to the capacity issue, or who's actually going to do this if you implement some policy. There are landlord registrations out there, or just they call them rental occupancy permits, which are either yearly or biannual inspections, or just if the lease changes. So if you've got a tenant that leaves, in between that tenant leaving and the next tenant coming in, some cities will send a code enforcement officer just to make sure that it's still habitable.
I think the village of Philmont has that.
Philmont does it.
Rental industry, if you're 4 units or more.
Say it again, Michelle.
Hudson has a rental registry that's 4 units or more, but the scope of the inspection is really for fire safety. It's not like comprehensive.
But if they notice something, that makes it,
Yeah.
So that's one big piece of legal news. One thing to keep an eye on is May 1st, tentatively, the scheduled date is May 1st for new AMI numbers. Speaking of AMI, I circulated a report that Pattern produced or published, I think 2 weeks ago now at this point, about really the issues with AMI, how kind of awkward awkward it is as a measurement, as a metric. It's triggered a lot of
I think that's how I got on
conversation.
this committee, actually, I was talking about the
Yeah, it's triggered a lot of conversation. Kevin O'Connor of Rupco just called me out of the blue, and we had about a 20-minute conversation about, what you could do about AMI. Kevin's perspective was it's too baked into the housing world. Just everyone uses AMI. There are too many things that are predicated on it. His take was we just need to start being more realistic about what percentages people are actually earning, right? So, when we talk about market rate housing, what market rate housing technically means is these units aren't subsidized, right? But we see units getting income controlled up to 120%, but that's above what the market rate actually is for rental units. If you were to go out and do a survey like I do, of what apartments are currently being advertised for, if you're up at 120, 130%, it's actually higher than what apartments are being advertised for, on the open market. Obviously, there's some, there are some other things to consider in there, right? Amenities, brand new apartment versus a home that might need some work, all those things. But it's just something to keep in mind. And then there was one other thing that I wanted to
HUD
bring up.
issues AMI? HUD issues AMI?
HUD issues AMI, yeah.
I mean, it's been problematic for over 20 years, the formula. And now it's even more outrageous because if people are renting one-bedroom apartments in Columbia County, let's say for $1,800, and we know that a large percent of our population who's working is making between $35,000 and $55,000 a year. I mean, and you just have that data. It just.
Well, I sent Michelle something yesterday. I hadn't actually looked at this at this level, and it was a conversation with somebody on Kingston's Community Land Trust Board that sort of triggered this. It triggered me looking at it, but also as Pattern's AMI report. So just in the city of Hudson, which is an outlier, but this tracks throughout the county and also the state. In Hudson, there's about a $60 difference in the median monthly housing costs between owner-occupied housing units and renter-occupied. One's about $1,600, the other's about $1,540. Not much difference between your rent and your housing costs if you're a homeowner. But the income levels between those median households it's about 2 to 1. I think it was about $110,000 was the median income for owner-occupied units, and it was about 55, or might be even lower. No, it was a 3 to 1 ratio. So
Will
it's a
you
3 to
run that
1.
stat one more time?
Yeah, I'll email this to you.
Can you email it to all of us?
Yeah, so hang on,
It makes me insane.
I'll just quote it because this, I've been doing this for a while, and every once in a while, I'll see a stat that kind of reorients my brain, and this was one of them.
Not a good one.
No, here we go. All right, so I'll give you the county first. In the county, for owner-occupied housing units, their median monthly housing cost is $1,364. And then for rental households, their median monthly housing cost is $1,260, so about $100 difference.
Does that
It's a
talk
little bit
about
more
the size
expensive.
of the units, number of bedrooms or something like that?
No, this is just pure,
Median.
yeah, you can't break, it doesn't break it down like that. So that they're about the same, right? So about $100 difference. The median monthly or the median income for the owner-occupied households is about 101,000 countywide. And then in the rental households, it's about 42,000.
Something
So
is drastically wrong with that number, Chris.
That's
Because
why
Take it up with
There's
the
no
census.
way homeowners are averaging $1,364 a month cost unless you're
Median.
putting in all the people who don't have mortgages.
Well, it's a median, so I think it does include that.
Well, it's not an average.
I think the issue is, it makes a point, but I think you're right, Dan. You'd have to really go and get a lot of data that's not blended into that number.
Well, I think there's a big difference between people who've bought or moved in the last 5 years, right? I mean, versus most people have bought their houses pre-1990 or something, then yeah.
And most renters have actually moved. Most renters have a pretty short tenure. Most renters have not been here for all that long.
And that goes on, Chris talks about all the time about, if you look at the market of what apartments are available and you're finding that they're all 1,800, but how many people are actually physically renting for $500 or $600 a month? They are out there, there are people renting a lot less than what you're seeing advertised because they're there and they're,
Yeah, well,
whatever,
there's,
you know.
there's a couple different things happening, right? So if you look at census data, the median rent in the county is just about $1,000 for, you know, just all bedroom sizes. But we know that that's much lower than what the median advertised rent is. So you've got people that have been staying in units where the landlords haven't raised the rent.
Right.
I know Dan, I'll out Dan as somebody who's got a bleeding heart for some of his tenants, has not raised rent for some people in a while.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. But then
Coming
when
to
you
an
look
end,
at-
by the way, I'm gonna retire soon.
Oh, no. Yeah, and then we look at what's advertised, it's usually quite a bit higher, but then there's also, you know, there's this. You'll never get your hands around this shadow market of people that have units for rent, but don't advertise them because
Right.
they wanna have.
Yeah.
You know, they wanna know who they're renting to, yeah,
Shadow market.
it's a shadow market,
Yeah, we gotta find out.
we're never gonna find that out.
The zombies in the shadow market.
So
I'm
just
always
because
amazed
it'll
how
bother
many
me
of
if I don't say it before we go. Zombie properties have a specific definition, because this came up in a, I don't know where this was, but it was another meeting, no, it's okay. It came up in another meeting recently. Oh, it was in Lebanon. Zombie properties specifically are properties where the bank issued a foreclosure notice.
Yes.
The resident was like, all right, I'm gonna get foreclosed on, I'll leave, and then the bank never actually finishes
Never
the
followed it
foreclosure. So it's vacant. The ownership is a little bit murky, technically it's still the homeowner's property, but now the bank is maintaining it, the bank typically pays taxes, so they don't lose the asset. But they never finished the foreclosure, and a while ago, the reason for that was. The house would have been, because a lot of these mortgages were, you know, written
Buying small.
prior to the subprime crisis. So if they foreclosed on it and it got valued, they would actually lose money by foreclosing on the asset, even though they then owned it. I think that's probably changed now, so I think there's probably fewer zombie properties throughout the county, but there are a lot of abandoned buildings. So there are more than I thought there were.
What would be your guess? 700.
Right, yeah, I think it's probably about 600 or so. Al Valencia from Habitat mentioned, I won't say what town it was. He mentioned to me, oh, there's this abandoned building that's in really bad shape. We're going to take it on, we think, as our next project. And I asked him where it was. He says on the west side of such and such road, between this and this. It's okay. And I went to go look for it. About 15 abandoned properties between the two roads that he mentioned. So there are a lot out there. And hopefully we'll be able to use the land back to capture some of these and get it back online.
Chris, this lawsuit that's before the Supreme Court, I wish I remember the name, you probably are
The
familiar
new
with it.
foreclosure case?
That could really upset the apple cart on a lot of things, couldn't it?
For foreclosures, yeah.
Well, I mean, even for municipality, I mean, for county.
It has.
Well, I'm just saying, if you guys have to pay full market value on a property that you just sold at auction for,
Well, no, that's not.
well, that's what
Yeah.
the case is about.
There's another case?
Yeah, there's another, the Supreme Court's hearing, well, they heard oral arguments about it, and I'm not sure.
It certainly will change how land banks work.
That's what I was wondering.
But it's not a continuation of the existing case, it's a new
No.
The
case.
new case,
What can you tell us what that is?
not off the top of my head.
Basically, if I understood it correctly, what happened is the people who are suing the municipality, it's up in Detroit, I think, if I'm not mistaken. The people are saying that the municipality, they should have gotten the full market value rather than what they got at auction. And they're saying that because it went through the municipality, the municipality got less money because it drove down the value of the property because it was in foreclosure.
Well, they could have sold it,
Right.
Well,
they could have sold it on.
go down, that before the Supreme
I'm
Court.
happy to.
This will be the last note, because I like to always scare people at the end of the meeting, so. The really scary case, if it goes anywhere, is, there's a version of this burgeoning, I think, in Kingston, somewhere in Ulster County. So that's just one of these. So in the light of the Supreme Court case, Tyler versus Hennepin, which completely changed how foreclosure sales work. Which basically means that if you're a town, you foreclose on a property, you sell it, you can no longer keep that delta if it's above a certain amount. Now there is a burgeoning case, they're starting to work this up where they want to backdate that and make that retroactive. So, yeah, I don't know that that's gonna go, it would bankrupt the country on a town by town level. The amount of money that municipalities have to pay back to tax laws would be insurmountably, you just would never fill that hole in your budget.
Well, one way around that is, in Australis, what we did a few years ago is put all your files into a file cabinet and let the mice get in there. Yeah, that makes a lot.
Thank
All right.
Could I just have the floor a minute? I wanted to personally thank Chris. You know, I was one of the early supervisors that worked on the idea of what can we do to do housing in Columbia County. And I gotta be honest, I knew that we needed to try and do something, but I didn't know that we could ever get very far with it. When we went out to hire, and we soon realized we needed to hire a consultant, and when we went out to advertise for that, I was part of that interview committee as well. I really never thought we'd find anybody with any background, knowledge that Chris has. You know, as soon as we interviewed him, we knew this is the guy, you know, and we brought him on. But Chris has done a tremendous amount of great work for the county, so I do have to thank you. You know, it was about 12 years ago that I brought the idea to the county board of supervisors about having a land bank. And, you know, we interviewed somebody from the Albany Land Bank, and they really, the message I got was, this is only good for the city of Hudson. It doesn't work for Columbia County. You were able to bring ideas to us of how that land bank process could work for the entire county, you know, so we've made some progress. So I do thank you a lot for all of the.
Here, here.
And I want to share with you,
That this abandoned property.
I want to share with
program
you
and
this
land bank
photo.
together.
I don't know if you can
What
see.
is this?
This is a thing the other day.
Oh,
This is-
I want to go talk to.
Oh, yeah.
Let me see if I- That's
So,
Chris. That's Chris with the governor and 8 other people that were hand selected by the governor's office in the red room. And that wouldn't be there if he hadn't done the great work that he did here. And he, you know, was recognized not only by CEDC in the county and people that worked with him here, but this was statewide for the work that that he had done, you know, throughout this effort. And he should be very proud of being selected, you know, for that effort. And if I can find the picture.
Don't worry, Mike, we can't see the pictures. They're all.
Can you see
they
this
look
one?
like a Rorschach test.
Okay. Anyway, I'll send you a copy because, you know, it was really an impressive day. Everyone got their 3 minutes, but it was the mayor of Kingston. It was Steve Aquario from the Association of Counties. It was the state housing commissioner with the governor. And it was the woman who runs housing for the North Country. But Chris held his own and did a great job and really was very impressive. But that's why we're going to keep him close at hand via contract instead of a W-2. So
I was gonna say, this is not a goodbye, because we continue to want to work with Chris. So.
yeah,
Thank you, Chris.
thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Okay.